So this video is about some of the idiosyncrasies when you're working in spatial computing and the way that Apple allow selection of objects within a immersive or a volume. So we're in StageIt and we've got a whole sample of objects loaded into a space. Now, when you start to build up scenes with lots of assets, what you're going to end up with is assets in front of one another. And what will happen is, whenever you're looking at an asset and trying to select it, Apple will basically take whichever one is in front as the one you're looking at. So if there's one asset in front of the other, it'll select the front one. Makes sense, right? But when you've got objects that are like this, it's not easy to know when an element of that asset is in front of another element. So let's take this example. This pen base looks like it's here in front of this model, because it's not behind it. And it looks like I should be able to select it. So if I look at this and I try and select it, nothing happens. And it gets a little bit frustrating. It's like, why can't I move that? So then if I double tap it to select it, to show me the information panel, nothing happens. Well, why is that? Well, we've just added a new feature, which is going to be really helpful in these scenarios, which dictates and shows what is going on. So each of these models is actually within a bounding box, and that's dictated by the size of the model. And what we can see here is that this pen is in its bounding box here, but it's actually inside this much larger red bounding box. Now, what does red bounding box mean? Well, if I unpin this, so if I unpin this details panel, we are looking at the properties of the selected element. So the selected one is the one with the green outline. So let's say if I look at this, now this has a green outline, shows me that this one is selected, Victorian lamp, so it gives me the file name. If I look back at the Apache and double tap, now the Apache is selected, it's telling me I'm looking at the AH, which is the Apache name. Now, the reason the Apache isn't moving when I pinch is because the Apache has been locked. So the locked basically means it won't scale, it won't rotate, you can't change it. But the Apache as an object is still interactable. So as far as Apple's concerned, it's here. And therefore Apple cannot allow me access to that because the first thing that my eyes is hitting are this box here. So we have another feature in the app to enable you to work with objects that are overlapping or inside one another. And that is freezing or disabling them entirely. So if I turn that, now that's hand has got a line through it. It's changed the Apache box to grey. Now what that tells me is that the Apache is no longer interactable. Still won't respond to interaction, but now it doesn't even respond to double tap. So this panel is not closing because as far as StageIt is concerned, this Apache doesn't exist apart from to render it. And now I can move this object, which is inside it. So if I want to change selection to my pen, I look at that, and now I know that that pen is the selected object. Now, because the Apache is frozen, if I look back at the Apache and double tap, it will not show up here. The only way I can get that to be interactable again is from the asset panel. So I find it in my asset panel and it's there and I can make it enabled. And again, so now it's locked, but selected. So if I now look at this and try and select it again, it's actually selecting the Apache because the Apache is a very, very big volume of model. And so this is just something you need to kind of understand when building scenes. So if you want to put something inside the lorry as a driver, you would have to position the lorry, scale it, and then you'd select it and you'd freeze it. This means it will be ignored and you can work inside it and Apple will not let you select it. So once the lorry is deselected, I can't look at that and reselect it. Now, there's two ways I can get this information panel to give me the information about that lorry. I can either unfreeze it, look at it and double tap, or I can just press the details panel in the asset management panel and it brings up this panel for details and I can unfreeze it from here and now it's enabled again. So that's really a really important thing to understand about the way in which you use a scene. So if you ever find yourself in a scene and you're trying to interact with something and nothing is responding or things keep moving by accident, then the setting in here, object bounding box, is a really useful visual tool to say, okay, what is actually happening on the invisible elements of my objects, what is inside one another, and that will explain why it's not moving. So again, I want to get that out. I'm going to go ahead and select the Apache. I'm going to make it disabled, and now I can bring my object out and I can scale it and do whatever I want with it. Does that make sense?